I blame the fathers. Blame the fathers.
I think this is the only guest that I've been nervous to have on my podcast. Yeah, a few mai susu mai mamaliu mai malo fa fonga malo for it's a poinga le malo at saso at sunu olo o mulimita I mai lungo tato upenga failangi. Mate fa filo ayatsu mal fa atalo fa sili le paia mal mamalo olo o fa ma eto fa ai o paia mo to malu. Ia ole anu nu atu ina awai fenga ta ole ai vivia. Lea e fia fa filo ai fa pito atu ai lau susunga le matua le swafa Fa'amatuainu mai le mautafono pule maava I Lufilufi I lau mua o fofonga o atua, le tuumua o loo au mawai nei I Washingtone. Whaftaile whaavanoa mai o lo taimi tāua tato te whaasoa ai. O le whaamoemoe o le nei tānoanga e autu I le aso tamā, ina ia sufele finangalo ma fofola le fala. Ma oele tamā e tusai ma lau tusi with all my heart. Ina ia tātou sa iritonu le sootanga o le pulenga o tamai tātou ainga ai maise le wā matina matmaitai. Ia, langi mama masoifua lau lelei I lau tō Fa'amatuainu.
Fatalo fat foi ila sunganan foi le taitai ole. Ia po le ta talanoanga foi le nei tuaso. Ia o te fatalo fat foi po ia mal mamalu. Ila tō olo. Fai ona fafonga ma muli lava I le nei po kalama manaia. O te fatalo fat foi ilo tō pa ia malu tō mamalu. Ia watu foi le famalo ia te oene. Mo le nei tau mwhainga. O te muli e ia mo ata fo ia tō talanoanga. Ai, o faisia o te I foi lele no o saule invitation o fape o pe ia o le sunga le ingo dia sunga lunga vinga le la dia to ina.
Mola dia sole.
Ai mano pap tai so for manuia nan. It's a real honor to be on your podcast today. I am more than happy to share anything that you ask. I'm really happy that you invited me to be part of your podcast.
Well, I appreciate you. You've become a father figure, so I do appreciate the time, especially since it's Father's Day. I think this is the only guest that I've been nervous to have on my podcast, as much as it is, but I think a lot of us, especially our generation, are very timid in Samoa.
You know, you're a Samoan. That's all that matters. You know, we can switch back and forth from English and Samoan.
I wanted the audience to get to know you a little bit better. As someone who's getting to meet you, what is something they would know and where you come from?
Okay, I hold two Matai titles from Fa'amatuainu and Malofie, but I'm always known as Filemoni Lauilefue. I was born in the village of Lufilufi at the Atua district. That's where Tama'ainga Tuiatua comes from. He resides in Lufilufi in Mulnuu. And I was born there, and about at the age of 5, our family moved to Sauluafata, which is my mother's village. My mother's from Sauluafata and Ofangasa. So we moved there, and I was always back and forth with my grandparents, and I spent most of those early years with my grandparents, Fa'amatuainu Yoasa and Matilda Swanky, who really helped me in a lot of things Samoan.
Growing up, I always visit Fa'alefa a lot. So we go to the Methodist church in Lufilufi. So it's always going down to the Ai to get to see, and it's always beautiful down there.
You know, the Methodist church in Lufilufi stands right next to Malemawa, which is the seat of the Fa'amatuainu. In fact, that's probably our land that was given to establish a church there. You know, I asked my father about it. I'm like, yeah, you know, some of our land is used by the Methodists for that church. I remember at a younger age, I used to go with my grandfather. He's an LMS, London Missionary Society. But we always, you know, said, okay, let's go to the Methodists because it's right next door. And a lot of my aunties married to the Awao and Piula because Piula is in our village too. So most of my father's family are Methodist. So I was brought up in two denominations, the LMS and also the Methodist.
I think that's really great. So a lot of things that I wanted to talk about has come from your book, which is With All My Heart. I have the copy here. I love the book. What made you decide to write this book?
Oh, man. That book was not supposed to be published. Most of those stories are personal stories, but somehow my children decided that maybe I should better publish it. And some close friends that I shared the manuscript with, they all want me to publish the things. It's a love story for my children, my wife, my siblings, and my whole family. But the stories are mainly for my grandkids because most of my children, they know it already. Probably sick of the story because I've been telling them those stories, but my grandkids are not familiar with it because they're young, except Lorelei. Lorelei, when she was in a high school,
Mhm.
she was writing an essay about her Fasinomaga, her identity
Mhm.
in Samoan. So she came and she wanted to interview me. So we did an interview that went on for more than an hour. And we were laughing and having fun. And she said, Grandpa, why don't you write a book about these stories? I started putting all those documentation into a book. And that's how I ended up with the book.
It's very inspiring having my parents gone that there was something like that left for me. It's not something I can look back at. But what I really love about it is the history behind it. I really do encourage people to read it because it's very well written. And maybe I am being biased because I know you, but I really do love the book.
Oh,
Um,
thanks, Nat.
So you write very tenderly about your mom and the way you grew up with her. And so I know the Chinese side comes from your mom. And it's a history in Samoa that I don't think lots of people really know about. Do you mind if you could touch a little bit about that?
Nah, that story is something else, I tell you, you know. And my mother, what a woman. She's Afasainga, still called. And, uh, and let me put it this way. In those days in Samoa, the social hierarchy at the top were the Europeans, you know, the Americans, the British, the Germans especially. They were the top one. And then comes the Afakas, you know, the half Europeans, half Samoans, and then the Samoans. But then, as you know, within the Samoans category, there are the Tamāingas, the one with the royal titles, and then the paramount chiefs, and the high chiefs, and then the talking chiefs, all the way down to the Kaulialea and the Tamaitai and all that. Then right at the bottom are the Chinese and the Solomon Islanders, who are the indentured laborers. Those that were brought over to work at the German plantation. Because the Germans, they came to Samoa for coconuts, copra, rubber, cocoa, coffee. Those were their main interests. And then later Panana, they took over a lot of land from the Samoans, usually in the interior of the country. And they opened up Samoa by building roads to the fertile valleys of Samoa. And they need people to do the work. As you know, Samoans weren't quite willing workers. There was a lot of conflicts there. So the Germans said, no way, we're we are not going to achieve our goal with this kind of workers. So they start bringing in the Chinese. They were indentured laborers. They were paid minimum salaries, compensations, but they provided housing for them, which were not very good from China, from south of China, and also from the Solomon Islands. They brought those people and started working in a plantation, and they proved to be good workers. Chinese are good workers. They're hardworking people. One of those Chinamen married my grandmother because the valleys of South Ufaka, the mountains, the Germans were interested in planting coconuts, coffee trees. They built roads to those areas for plantation. And the Samoans were benefiting from it. And then they also built a harbor there. That was the first harbor in all of Samoa, the one in South Fata, and a rail that carries all those goods from the interior right down to the ships, the big German ships there in the harbor, especially the rubber and the copra. So that's a bit of history there. And so getting back to my grandfather had a lot of different skills. The Germans found out that he was a good seamstress, you know, good in sewing, cooking, and also vegetable garden. Salwafata at the time, it was a buzzing center for the Germans with the plantation there. So that's how that Chinese man met my mother. So he did have a lot of skills that really benefited our own Samoan family.
There's a history behind it because it tells a lot of how the Chinese, the German, especially because it was Germany before Britain and New Zealand took over. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And the Americans who were only interested in American Samoa. Because of the harbor.
One of the other things you just mentioned now, because my next guest is going to Miss Solomon Islands. I think a lot of people know that there's a lot of Chinese families that came because of the Great Separation, but you just mentioned the Solomon Islands also were there. I think I don't know what village is it that they have that Tamauli? Don't they have like a rugby team? Do you know it?
Tamauli, because I think the government allotted a piece of land somewhere there in Mulinu,
Okay.
in Mulinu there for the Solomon Islands. That is when they left the plantation. Those that didn't want to go back, that was their center, somewhere around that area. And that was how they were called in those days. It was Tamauli. That's better than the derogative terms that they used to call them Meuli, which was an insult. They married Samoans too and started it. I have very good friends who are also Alpha Solomona, Alpha Samoa. And they're proud of their heritage as Tamauli. They played a major part in the economy of Samoa in those days. They were mainly working in the coconut plantations. The Chinese was mainly the cocoa, the coffee, the rubber trees, and all other crops that the Germans wanted.
Yeah, it was also interesting to learn from your book because I didn't even know in those days that Salofasa became like a main harbor where the Germans had established a lot of their plantations, and I wasn't aware of that history either.
Yeah, that's the first big harbor in Samoa. Before the missionaries came, there were already traders and all that, but Americans, Germans, and eventually they took a like in the place because of opportunities for the plantation, mainly the coconuts. So there's that huge flat land and Salufaka valleys there are fertile and ideal for all those plantations. And the Germans took a like in it and established a harbor there where all the big boats come and pick up the goods to be taken to Germany, and open up Salwafaka too, and opportunity for Salwafaka people to move to the interior and start working their piece of land that were not used by the Germans. So it did a lot of, there was a lot of benefits for the Salwafaka people. At the same time, there were a lot of Salwafaka ladies that married Germans too. And they took a lot of land from Salwafaka because of that marriage. Up till today, there are lots of Salwafaka land that are owned by Afakasi Siabangi of Samoa because of
Oh,
those things.
it's interesting because you are part German. I think it's from your dad's side, though, right?
Oh, yeah. This is from my grandmother on my dad's side. My grandmother is of Siamangi of Samoa, but her Siamangi was in Savoy because the Swanky went to Savoy and established some huge plantations there and married a daughter of a Makaya, Isakol Pai. And that's why my grandmother is a Swanky and a Makaya, tied to the Satol Pai. And that, if she's half German, half Samoan, that made my father what, quarter German, and that would be make me what, 1/8 German? But I've never looked at as any part German. I'm looked at as a half a singer, that, but it's just the way things are and were in those days.
That is very interesting because to Hawaii, everyone's always saying, "Oh, I'm a part this, quarter this." But in Samoa, even though we know that we are something else, part German, part Asian, every time I ask someone, even though their last name, they're like, "I'm Samoan."
It's
Just
the same until I wrote the book, and then I said, "I might as well tell my true identity." But, I don't go around telling people that I'm this and this and that. I'm a Samoan, period.
I think that's wonderful. And I didn't know this until I was at ASCC. One of my teachers, her dad was also Chinese, and she talked about how it was called, is it called the Great Separation? Is that what they actually called it?
Yes, yes. It was a
Okay.
tragic story, that one.
And so it's not like they wanted to leave, but they were torn away from their families. Do you know exactly what was the reason why they decided to return to where they came from?
Mostly, they were never meant to stay permanently in Samoa. They usually bring them in waves. One group perhaps serve about 3 to 5 years, and then they bring in a new group. But what happened was that most of them did not want to go back to China. And also, when the Germans left and the New Zealanders came, they should send all of them back to China because the New Zealanders saw the progress that they were making. besides working in the plantation and all that, they had married a lot of Samoan women and start setting up businesses. Maybe they saw that as some kind of threat to the advocacy Palangi Samoan and also the advocacy German Samoan and New Zealand Samoan. There's a bit of jealousy there, especially when they saw the progress, because they were hardworking people. Their own wives and their children were beginning to do well. But in my own case, my grandfather was repatriated to China. He didn't want to go, but a lot of them that didn't want to go, they ran to the bush and hid there. But my grandfather wasn't very good at that. They caught him all right and then put him on a boat and shipped him back to Southern China.
Yeah.
And left a wife with 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. When my grandfather was repatriated to Southern China, my mother was probably just 2 years old. She remembered very little of her father. And about 2 years later, her mother passed during childbirth to a second husband. And that left her like an orphan without any parents. So living up as a Saiga and then with no real parents, it wasn't easy. I guess
Yeah.
that's what is so tough.
The thing that I thought was really interesting is that you talked about it in your book about how they were all sort of separated to different places, but even though they didn't have a father in a sense, the extended family was there to support. I thought about the story that you told about your mom and how she was a strong woman, very resourceful, and the fact that even though they were separated as siblings, they still remained in contact. I think it's something we don't really talk about, that sense of adoption, but it's adopting within our own families. Can you talk a little bit about that?
As you know, that in our Samoan culture, there is no formal or official adoption procedure. In case of my mother and her siblings, the aunts and the uncles and all the relatives stepped in and took over them. And just, her uncles just came over and took 2 of them to American Samoa. The oldest, who was, I think, 6 or 7 at the time, and my mother's sister. So they took them to American Samoa and left my mother and her other brother back in Saulofata to her other uncles and aunts and cousins. So that's how it worked in those days. There was no such thing, although there were Afasainga. Her Chinese father did a lot for the family. So there wasn't any trouble at all of just taking in these kids. So that was something about our Samoan families in our Samoan culture. Okay, the family just take over, and it's just like that. That separation was something else for my mother and her siblings, and even communication and seeing each other wasn't easy in those days. It's only in later years that they started seeing each other again. But all those years, my mother and then her brother eventually went to New Zealand, and her uncles and her kids migrated to Famasa because he's just been bestowed the title of Atuatasi, and that just left her and my dad to take care of the family in Salufata. But the separation of my mother and her siblings was something else. That's why I guess me and our cousins in American Samoa are very close because of all that time that that her parents were separated. It's very emotional for us, not just me and my first cousins, but also my mother and her siblings. It's hard to explain, but those who have experienced that, it's something that actually shape your life.
The book itself, you talk a lot about education, and it's fascinating because you've been through every facet of education. So I don't think people understand the difference between the educational system in Samoa versus American Samoa, which is a US based system, and then Samoa under the New Zealand based system. It's unique because you've experienced both systems. You taught in Samoa and then you came into American Samoa. So it's unique that you got to have both experiences, both in the New Zealand and the US system. You do talk about it in your book about how you decided to move to American Samoa. What exactly made you decide to go? And what was your experience through that transition?
My uncles came over for a falabelabe in Saulufaka, and they know that I had been to New Zealand and I was a teacher. But at that time, I was looking after the hostel students at Samoa College and taught at Lufilufi Intermediate School. So they asked me, how much am I making, in terms of salaries? I told them, and they just hold their mouth. And they told me that is not enough for you, and especially our family here is depending on you. How can you manage with that salary? And I said, I can't. To tell you the truth, I just can't support my parents and myself with this kind of salary. And then they told me, listen, with your background as a qualified teacher trained in New Zealand, we're willing to give you a contract, especially some of my uncles were high up in the Department of Education. A couple of them were deputies director in the DOE, Department of Education. And then they said, how much would I make if I come over? And then they told me, and I said, boy, if you give me a contract tomorrow, I'll sign it. But I have to clear my bonds with the Samoan government. Or finally, if you went on a scholarship, you got to come back and serve for at least 3 years in Samoa before they let you go. So that's so I went and was able to get out of my bond after 2 years. Did a good explanation to them. So I got a contract from the DOE in American Samoa. My parents, they weren't happy, although I'll be making good money and enough to support them too. They weren't happy seeing me go. They didn't like that at all, especially my father. My mother was happy because I'm going to part of her family. But my dad, he never approved of my going because he has other goals for me in the village and the family. I took my mother's advice and left. I went to American Samoa. And the first school I went to, which is Matafao Elementary, man, I was shocked. The mode of instruction are done on via television. I look at it and I said, this is not going to work right away because most of the time teachers are not paying attention to the lessons from TV and the kids are not paying attention. I looked at it and I said, I think I can find a niche here. Can find a place here. And I did. I noticed that the kids were not learning anything because the system depends on the follow-up lessons done by teachers who don't even fully understand the television lesson. So I just took over. The principal and the central office start noticing what I was doing. I just put my head down and did the work. And eventually I started working my way up. Pretty quickly, after 2 years, I was selected to go on another scholarship to do my bachelor's and a master's. Because when I came from New Zealand, I was only a certified teacher, but didn't have a bachelor's degree. So American Samoa offered me a scholarship to go back to school and did my schooling at the University of Hawaii. But in American Samoa, I think the television system was good, but there was a huge need for teachers to be trained properly. That's why they started that teacher corps program that I was in.
I thought it was interesting because in the 1960s, I believe, American Samoa was like the world's largest educational TV broadcasting system. And I believe that's where KBCK TV, that stands today, comes from.
The American guinea pig of of technology with education using television. It was. They put a lot of money on that system. It was working. There were lots of good benefits too. But like I said, they just ignored the training aspect of the Samoan teachers. They were focused heavily and then manned the classroom with a lot of palangis. And then when the palangis start going back and the Samoans start taking over, that did work out quite well. But the system itself, it was really good, but provided that you have good teachers who can follow up on the television lessons instead of just sitting there to monitor. And also, everything was done in English. And Samoan was the second language. If you're a qualified trained teacher, you'd be able to help the kids bilingually during those lessons and also after the lessons to teach them both languages. So that's a problem that I noticed and I picked up on that. Least they could do is do it in both languages, which the Palangis in those days weren't qualified to do because they couldn't even understand the Samoan language. They should have done a lot of training for the Samoans to be good in English and the Palangis to be good in Samoans. I'm talking about bilingual education now.
Yes. I think that was the thing, right? Because at the time, it was just like immersed in the English language to learn the English way. And so, just for anyone out in the audience, you had spent a good amount of your career in teacher quality. So, hence the reason why you were creating these different programs to actually make it so that it wasn't just English.
I was asked to move to the Division of Curriculum and Instruction, which is a curriculum office for the whole territory. And they asked me to be an English specialist. I guess because I could speak English, you know. And my background in New Zealand was teaching students English as a second language. Okay, so I worked there and started working in the English department, and we're all manned by Palangis from New Zealand. Bilingual education went quite the approach that they chose. So I started working with them on English as a second language and bilingual programs, and I advocated for those two approaches, mainly because I know in my heart this would be a better approach to have Samoan kids not only learn their second language, but also master their own Samoan language. And the best way to master a second language is to master your first language first. And then, once you know your A, E, O, U, and putting together the letters of the alphabet, you just transfer those skills into learning the second language. The alphabet might be slightly different, but the transference of skills, it's the same. So I advocated for that and fought for that, and won some battles, lost a lot, but eventually the department start committed to bilingual and ESL strategies to help the kids.
I'm just looking at the portion of the book that you talk about because I think it's a great transition. Like you said, you won a few battles and you've lost a few, but I'm reading this from page 166 and it says, "This is looking back on my 3 decades with the Department of Education. I'm struck by how these years have shaped not just my career, but also my understanding what truly matters in education. I arrived as a young teacher with academic knowledge and idealistic passion. I departed with something far more valuable, a deep appreciation for the interplay between policy and classroom reality, between cultural preservation and educational advancement." So you talked a little bit more as instead of creating like this perfect system, it was more of creating relationships with the people that you're working with. And for me, that's a lesson I pick up, and it's hard for me because I'm very systematic and I want things to be in order, and learning that it's also the relationships you build with people. So I thought that was beautiful.
It's a very important thing is to know how to navigate your way around different characters, different people and their own agendas, especially when you work in a central office as an administrator. You might have some great ideas, but if people around you don't support it, forget it. It's not going to happen. And there were times that I was impatient. I just want things to happen. Why? Because I know this is good. I know that based on the research, this will help our people, will help our students. Some people never saw it that way. They prefer to achieve their own purpose. And I find that I got impatient sometimes. But the lesson I learned is that you got to get the support of people around you. If you make sure that they all understand and they're all on board with you and work together, and that's a skill that I quickly have to learn, is to get along with, to get people's support. And sadly, being from Western Samoa too didn't help my case, because they look at me and said, "Who is he to tell us that this is better than what we know?" And I still remember what one of the directors that I was working under, who understands the Samoan system very well. I tried to talk to him things that, the curriculum that I want to change. For example, I was trying to introduce Pacific literature as part of the curriculum from upper grades, from high school and also in the middle school. Because I like Pacific literature, Albert Waynes and other, but I ran into a lot of people that didn't like that. They prefer to just go with the American literature or whatever book the United States tells you to read. And I went to the director and he said, "Ke loali o filmot, ole kung uurgi. You have to do what the Americans do." They like to follow what the Americans tell them to do. Okay? So that was it. He said, Pacific literature, The educators here don't like that. They just want to teach American literature. And to me, that didn't make sense at all at that time. When I do my trainings of teachers in English, I always use Pacific literature. It's good for the eternity of the kids, and they get identified with stories because there were
Mhm.
stories written about Pacific experiences, and they did like them. And
Yeah.
I encouraged them to read these poetries and books written about Pacific people. And I think they're doing that now. I'm not so sure what's going on now
Well, I
because
taught Pacific literature in my classes. It's hard, like, teach British or American literature if they've never experienced it. People don't like to read it because they're like, I don't understand this. I don't know what it feels like. But you give them something that's specific, they're interested because they're like, oh my gosh, it's my experience. So I feel Pacific literature is something I would definitely keep encouraging people to look into. It's good to hear your backstory in terms of the things that you had to go through with the pushback to make sure that we have that in place has eventually changed a lot of different mindsets behind it. I enjoyed reading those parts because it showed there was a internal conversation to make these things happen.
when I went to Samoa College, we have a Pisco teacher, Bradshaw. He just loves Shakespeare. That's all we do is Shakespeare. At the beginning, oh my God, not Shakespeare again. We used to call him Mr. Spear. And slowly, as we start doing plays, Shakespearean play, and start analyzing all those sonnets and all those different plays, the language that was different, not standard English. This was old English. We just loved it.
Mm.
He was really good in teaching Shakespeare and explaining things to us, relating it to our own Samoan, especially characters like Macbeth, Julius Caesar. This is all about leaders and all that, and Samoans love that, and
Yes.
creating a liking to it because he was able to contextualize that in our own Samoan setting. He was excellent. He just instilled in us the love for literature.
That's funny. I don't know if there's something between Macbeth and Samoa because my mom loved Macbeth too. Based on what I'm seeing in your career, you're very passionate about teacher quality because you took some time at ASCC to establish like a 4-year program for teachers. So I'm curious as to, is it your own experience or is it the people that you were mentoring that made you want to step in, help push that further?
I was an assistant director for curriculum instruction. I was heading the curriculum office for American Samoa and the Department of Education. And then new director coming in wanted to create a new division, which was called Teacher Services. So the director told me, okay, that's a new challenge for you. Enough of the curriculum office. So I moved on and did that. And eventually that one became known as the teacher quality because of the funding from the United States. Teacher quality, and I designed all those staff development and certification and establishing the Teacher of the Year program. We were able to send our teachers to compete in the National Teacher of the Year. Those were all during my tenure as the director of teacher quality. So I was very happy with what I've done with teacher quality. But then moving to the college, it was just a natural transition to something that I like, which is
Yeah.
training people to be teachers. So after almost 10 years in that division, I retired. And then after I retired, well, what next? What am I going to do? Tia Seroti Pistat was heading the teacher aspect of the community college. Seth Ngaleai was the president of the college at that time. And Seth is an old colleague of mine in Teacher Corps. Teacher Corps is this degree program that we went to in Hawaii. So he said, yeah, this is good. I'm glad you came. The timing is good because we're in the process of establishing a new teacher education program, which will become a 4-year program for teachers to do their bachelor's degree in education. Because at that time, you go to ASCC, you get an AA. But this time, they wanted to move on to a bachelor's degree level. So I went in and part of that, the developmental stage of that program. And when I retired from there after 14 years, I think, 12 to 14 years, we've already graduated students with bachelor's in education. And I love training students to be teachers. This is a teacher education program. Something that I like is to mentor and train students and teachers already to be, to be better teachers.
I know we've been harping on the teaching because I see a lot of changes there, but here's the thing, that's who I've always known you to be, but having read the book, I saw that you also part-time at some point had been driving a taxi. And why is he doing that? Like you have a great career, but after your job, you drove a taxi for quite some time. And then you even went into the military and also went in as a combat medic. So there was just so many things happening that I just realized. I was like, wow, I didn't know this. Like I was telling Tui, man, I didn't know this about your dad. So you were hustling. What made you so motivated to go do all these other things? Uh,
You will do everything that you can to make sure that you will have everything for your family, you know, not just to support your own wife and your children, but also for your families back in Samoa, my family in Fasa, my wife's families in Fankongo and Leone. You have to have enough resources to do all that because I don't want to provide service. Those are my responsibilities to not just for my immediate family, my wife and my kids, but for my aina. I want to do my tour as well. So although I was making okay money with DOE in that main job, but I wanted to, I wanted to do other things too. So that's why first I ran my own taxi, and it was based at the airport. So when I finish work at 4 o'clock, I go straight with my taxi to the airport, hustle and get some money. Probably go home at 12 o'clock and got a bit of extra money there. It's about 2 years later. They were establishing an Army Reserve Center in American Samoa, but they needed a combat medic. So I went and took the exam, and I did all right. So they said, okay, we're going to send you for training. So I left Samoa. I think I spent almost 6 to 7 months in the States to do my military basic training and then my combat training as a medic. Then came back to American Samoa and did that during the weekends. Instead of the taxi now I have my Army Reserve job. All those extra incomes help with the development of my family. I was able to buy land in Tafuna, Coco land, build a house, do all those things. I stopped the taxi and started a bush store there because my kids were growing up and they loved the store because they were running it. There were enough people living there at that time because the Coco Land just opened up. So I figured, oh, this is a good time to start a store here. So I opened up a store for my kids, but they ended up eating a lot of things there in the store. But they learned a lot because in the store, they were actually running and organizing the store, especially my boys, because they were older. And so that's, I started a store and the kids literally ran it to the ground. Uh, so I had that. And also at the same time, I had half an acre. So there weren't very many people. So I started a biggery thing. I raised pigs. And there was quite a lot of them too at that time. And salad. Talk about being hustled.
yes.
So, so looking back on all those things, and I want to remain idle. I'm always doing something. You know what I'm saying? And
Yes.
of course, my wife is always there with me in those things, supporting me.
I
Although she
think
was a school librarian herself, because of medical issues, she retired, but she was always helping, me and
porting
my
all your
kids. I put my
ideas.
kids to work in all those ventures, especially my boys. My daughter, oh no, she locked herself in her own room and do her thing there. That's what this book is all about. It's a love story for what I done with my family, my wife, and my children, and all that. You know, Nan?
Yeah. And I was just thinking because Dear Sunga is a women empowerment podcast, You raised 3 sons and just 1 daughter. So from your perspective as a father, like, what was the biggest difference?
I was hoping you wouldn't bring that up, man. With fathers, who do they like the most? We try to raise all our children equally because you can't set a good example. But somehow, being the only girl, she seems to get extra attention from me. Like I said, my boys, they were strong and helped me in all the physical things outside the house. And they're very responsible boys. They helped me a lot with all the physical things and doing things. But that killed my daughter. She always locked herself in the room and just do her own things, reading, because she was an avid reader too. And she loves her music. That's why she can't cook. She can't sew. She can't even iron. Because her mother do all those things. Sorry, Tui. And her brothers know it, but they know that's their only sister. And they're very, very protective of her. And Tui make the most of that.
Which is also kind of interesting because you had all boys and 1 girl, and now you have a generation, your grandkids, almost all of them are girls. So
Oh,
how has that shifted and changed for you?
our Ainga back in South Lufaka is known for Ainga Kengi. We have
Mm.
some powerful women in our family at South Lufaka. Like when the whole family, South Lufaka, left for New Zealand and American Samoa and States, my mother took over just like that. And, with my own family now, Tui, she seems to work very well with her brothers, which is something that I'm proud of them. My boys respect her, and she respected them. They work very well together. And if you notice, we all live in very close proximity here, here in Lazy, and my oldest boy, Philip, is holding the fort back home, so they miss him too.
And I think it's great, and that's why I wanted to take our conversation, is because you're also coming out with the 2nd book. I love the 1st book, so anyone out there, like, you love Pacific literature, you love good writing, this is definitely a great book. So the 1st book is all about your life. So what can we expect from your 2nd book?
Oh, oh, the second book is the reality of what's going on now in Samoa. The real part of my own upbringing is in the 1st book. But the 2nd book, I now look at Samoa from a different kind of lens. I'm looking at the reality of it outside of my own family. I see a lot of abuses and corruptions of Samoa culture with our church and our politics. And I see a lot of the young generations turning their back onto our culture and the church. I ask why? Why is this happening? And being a Matai and a Faifiao, I know why they're doing that. There is so much demand with money. Things are getting so excessive in how we do our Fa'amatuainu these days, and even how we contribute to the church that is turning these people off, especially the young generation. They move off island, or they still stay with their families in their village, but decided not to participate, a way of ignoring them because they know that this is not right. They continue to suffer under the system. And the abuses and all that, it's from the leaders of families in the church. If you look at the way the Fa'amatuainu these days, all the money and who did they come from? From the family members. And who benefit? The high-ups, the matais, the leaders. It's not very good. I said to myself, this system is going to crack. It's going to snap. I value my culture. I don't want that to happen. And that's why I wrote this book, The Corruption of a Sacred Trust is the title. I look at it, Wavale tu lima le tofi. Tofi is our heritage. It's our culture that was passed on by our ancestors to our parents. And I look at it nowadays, and then I said, Wavale tu lima tu tofi, our heritage. In other words, it's being abused and people are turning their backs on. And that's not very great. I've been thinking a lot about this because I was part of all that. I was a part of that abuse, but Now I said, this can't go on. We have to speak up and we have to do something about this. Otherwise, we're going to lose our younger generations. You're losing it.
But I think it's the concept of keeping up with the Joneses. It's basically to glorify a title, glorify a family. The way I was always taught with Samoa, be kasi sa iko nga kiad mo ue, e sidia kwa nga ve kulai la kupe lai ke la kwe e sosoangi. But nowadays it's like we have to take this much money. We have to give this much or else it's not going to be a good thing. I've always been taught it doesn't necessarily have to be all this, but if you give it with your heart and you're there to be present, and that's a wonderful thing. That has always made me truly feel present about being Samoan.
You know, the original aspect of the Fa'amatuainu is to bring families together, to celebrate an event. You are welcome into the family with whatever you can afford. If you can't, your presence is important because there are other ways you can serve the family in Fa'amatuainu. You can do the cooking, you can all different chores, being together with families in time of loss and in time of celebration and enjoying the fellowship together. That's the intention of Fa'amatuainu in our Samoan culture. But what's happening now, it's sad because greed has taken over. From who? From the leaders, from the top. It's become a competition between families, between high chiefs of family, between villages. Who can show off the most wealth? The more wealth you have, the highly regarded you are in the family and in the village and in the country. And who suffers? The people that all those contributions that they ask for is well above their pay grade. They can't afford it. If every week there is a Fa'amatuainu and you're required to donate $200 and find mats and all those material things, goods and everything, it's undoable and unsustainable. And
Yeah.
younger generations have turned their back onto. Because they're Western educated now. Oh no, look at those guys smiling all the way to the bank, and look at us. That's where they keep asking us for money and donation. That doesn't make sense. And that's the reason why I wrote this book. I'm pointing out the problems and pointing out ways that we can perhaps change things, reforming the system so that we can keep our heritage, our culture, and get back to the real purpose of Fa'amatuainu,
Yeah.
which is to bring family together, to fellowship happily, to celebrate events like weddings, bestow, and to mourn together our loss in funerals.
I think that's very interesting, and I think it's cool to see it from different perspective. And my mom never had a makai, but she was always there to tautua. I won a title, but she goes, I've alufa makai ikimakiva because all you're going to do is tautua. That's the perspective my mom had. And I think it was looking at my grandfather because I've seen him where he's gone pula simila ikikiad mga iyayalwa mga afya kawe kaka. And I think that's more important. You hope to see continue to thrive. I think it's difficult, but I like to learn more because it is a perspective that a lot of people understand. Even for myself, I'm so glad that I took her advice because I don't think I would ever be able to afford being a makain.
Guys always try to do things. We don't want to put a lot of pressures on the awainga, on the people. Okay, usually do a lot of things, but they don't do a lot of demands on the people to do things. But to me, the good makais are the ones that have to do things according to what the family can afford. Do things within your means. Don't go excessive. It's only when people look for their own wala ko viinga.
Mhm.
And that's why it has become a competition now. Okay. And it looks like every family is doing that nowadays. They overdo things, but
Yeah.
there are lots of good makai. There are lots of good makai that don't really bend to the pressure of that competition. They just do whatever the Wainga can afford. And those are good families. Those are a family that really love one another and they enjoy the fellowship together. They care about the pressure from other families and other villages to do a lot of things. And they just do it within their own means and they enjoy their own fellowship.
I'm excited to read your book. And so when do we expect to have it published?
So I'm hoping the book should come out before Christmas. Before
Yes.
Thanksgiving or sooner. We're moving ahead. I have some other works that I'm working on too, so it's with the publishing now. But I'm I'm concentrating on a couple of other books. Time is not on my side. Yeah, that's where I am.
I didn't want to bring it up because I know your condition is not the best state, but I also see that you are also still striving, still doing, going on, and you have a YouTube channel where you actually do your vlogs. You're definitely not a person that just sits idly. You did your gardening, your backyard, and it's well maintained, always doing a little project here and there.
I love gardening. I got a nice garden going on in my backyard. I love that the most. Writings, it's okay, but gardening, I just love to see things grow. I grew up in a family that always have a garden. Our Chinese grandfather taught my grandmother how to plant vegetables. And then my mother inherits it. That's another thing about my Chinese grandfather. She taught my grandmother how to sew and bought her a sewing machine. And that sewing machine becomes the village sewing machine, and raised chickens and pigs. But getting back to vegetables, I always, doesn't matter where I go, I always look for a place where I can plant vegetables for my family, for my kids and friends.
What's the secret to a green thumb?
To me, it's a therapy to just watch things grow. I worked a lot with my father in his plantation. For 1 year, I didn't go to school. From age 9 to 10, I worked with my father in the plantation. And that's where I saw the values of things that you plant. I saw them grow as a result of feeding your family and all that. So I got this like for planting things and watching them grow for at an early age. And it stays with me. It's a form of therapy for me at this age, to just watch them grow and then
Yeah.
put them on a dining table and share it.
Yeah. That's awesome. I know that that's one of the things that you love to do is definitely gardening. You do have your YouTube channel that talks like do your vlogging of family life, and you do that for your grandkids. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, we had this little thing out here in California where I was starting to teach a Samoan. I like to teach through music because it's also a lot of proverbs, deep meanings that help people understand the Samoan language. And one of the music that you helped me through Tui was Le Manutanie because it had a story behind the leprosy colony. I was curious because even though you were at ASEC, there were times that you might have been teaching. What was like one of your favorite lessons?
With Samoan music, there's a lot of poetry in it.
Mm-hmm.
And most Samoan music is about love. It's about relationships, And Samoans are romantic people. They love writing and singing about love story. It's another interesting one. My parents' favorite one. It's like a family's main song, Lo Se Ye, which is a
Yes.
love story. And, the metaphors in those songs, it's so amazing how those Samoan writers write those lyrics and those music. And another one that I love to talk about in my Samoan language classes when I was teaching my Samoan teachers and Samoan students. She just mentioned another one, is Lemantang. Yeah. That's another very sad story but full of lessons of love and your faith by all the difficulty, the hardship. People don't forget their loved ones, which was about that. I think you just mentioned some of it. Another one is Rosalia. Rosalia. I mean, it shows some history too of Samoan. Uh, a omo mali le tofu masio tino. Ai tangi o umata ang tilo. Ai tangi o umata. But it tells us a bit of history at that time. That's the time when there were banana boats from New Zealand that comes in twice a month. And the
Uh-huh.
two boats was one is Tofua and the other one is Matua. And those boats, not only that they carry the bananas for New Zealand, but they also carry a lot of immigrants going to New Zealand. And that guy who's the writer of that song's girlfriend, because of parents not agreeing with the relationship, put her on the tofua and sent her to New Zealand. And this poor
Yes.
guy is standing there on the wharf watching the the tofua disappear with her lover. That's that songs, and a lot of other beautiful lyrics. And even if you listen to Punyalawa'a, listen to Tiama'a, all those Matulua Whangalii, and those old songs. When I talk about old, these were the songs that started in the late 60s and early 70s. The lyrics of those songs is something else. It's literature at its best in Samoan. Yeah. It's talk about a lot about relationships, Samoan. So I love teaching that too. I always play the guitar in my class and we sang it together. Once we sang the song, and most of them don't know the lyrics. And I came out the lyrics and we discussed the meaning. Then they start opening their eyes. And I said,
Yes.
right, look at it. Now your assignment is to write a Samoan love story song. Okay. So yeah, I loved it. And my own parents, they love music. They love singing. My father instilled in us the love for literature because he used to read to us every night. In those days, it was only the radio, but every night she read to us. There were books that already been translated in Samoan by Dr. Faya Fanafi, Mayai Olake, Treasure Island, and King
Mhm.
Solomon's Mine, The Black Tulip. They were all translated, and those are our favorite stories. And my father used to read it, and we discussed the theme with him, and the Bible, because his parents were also Malua Theological College graduates. He is that old bugger instilled in us the love for literature. Even those days when I wasn't going to school, but I was reading anything that I could get my hands on, the newspapers and everything, Samoan and English. With reading in English was almost like self-taught. and, and there wasn't much English, materials around in the brothers in those days. So, whenever I get my hands on it, I would read it. But why and how it got to us was from my father, reading
Yes.
us every night. And we love those stories. To a point whereby my father called my youngest brother Manipali. She's the main character of the Black Tulip. Van Bell is a Dutch name. The guy that first planted the true black tulip.
Oh, wow, he was very loved literature. I didn't see the correlation before because our Samoan language, especially, the ngangana matsai, it's very poetic and it has a very great rhythm to it. And I feel like the way I had learned it sometimes with my mom is like we'll sit and we'll listen, we'll sing songs because even the enunciation of a word, you have to enunciate the word correctly. Well, and I think music kind of gives that, and actually listening and learning about what the meaning is of a word is just within the lyrics. So I wanted to do a little bit of that with our conversation because you said Tiamaa, and you know how Tiamaa has their new Asoleanga song.
Oh, I love that new Tiamaa.
Yes.
We listened to that Asoleanga one, and the other song that you being a Methodist, I think a couple of years ago, one of the Tiamaa song was used by one of the Faifeau because I think it was like leading up to an independence celebration. All the whole government was in the church service, and that guy used the Tiamaa song as the last to support the theme of his sermon, and that was
Oh,
wonderful. And
wow.
Samoan lyrics, Samoan music, it's absolutely amazing. We have some good ones. There are lots
Yes.
of good ones.
Yes. Even like the church songs too is pretty good. So, I know I'm taking up a lot of your time, but I really love the conversation because I feel like a lot of people that are tuning in, especially into the podcast, also have a very big want to hold on to their Samoan language and understanding it. Even for myself, I was like thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have Fa'amatuainu on a podcast. I'm worried that I'm going to say something wrong. Kasi se kala fa Samoa, ngalela yung sound.
In fact, I'm halfway through a book that will help our people here in the diaspora to learn our Samoan language,
Oh,
and it's going to be
nice.
bilingual. And it was mainly for my own grandkids, but now I see the need of it in the diaspora There are lots of
Yes.
adults that don't understand Samoan language too. So I'm teaching you through that book how to read, write, and speak in Samoan, and it's done in both languages, so that it's easy to understand.
That's awesome. I appreciate you coming in to share your wisdom. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to kind of put out there on the podcast that I might not have touched on?
I have a I have a lot to talk about, but I think for now, Father's Day is coming, and I just want to say something a little bit in Samoan about Samoan fathers.
Yes.
O kako wale ki mar kakaro ainga. A fale kong war ka mai. Fale kong ainga ako alaba. O ngai ki ngā o la ko e wha mau pupoa. Au kako. It's our responsibility to keep that boat afloat of families. If, these days with a lot of broken families, I blame the fathers. I blame the fathers. You're the head of the family, and you're supposed to be sure that your families is well secured. Our role is very important, and that's what God wants. We are the head of the family. Our mothers plays a major part in organizing and running events for the family, but we fathers are the one that keep that boat afloat. Okay? And it comes from what? From love. Okay? Responsibility. And those simple values. That's why I think that with Father's Day approaching, let's not forget that. We have a responsibility that's very important. And God assigned us that role to make sure that our family are okay. I guess that's my little message.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for taking your time. Paftay fo ilaw sunga matuainu litula ay may liloto malie faasawa mailo to Fa'amanino Malofie Filemoni Lauilefue upenga tafai langit ne yaso o matungo fiele ni fatsingo no oe a faiwai se tala sasi pele tusa foilo faalongo ne yaso ia lo falafo fangava awa o oe lava matua faitama o matungo fiema le nei talanoanga tadwailo away me ne yaso.
Paftayana, ftaya mole abanoa, ifia for tata noa ti oe. Ele oe versus, we si le fia o oe a foi o lisi o fine le o te ifia la vai fatasi me iau me fai. Na ango e am soson mit fo. Mol kako tato umolo. Whanau longo mai nei pokala. Ia. Na o umona sauno atu tai o podcast a whapela ua iai fo ini tala ua whale tonu po o le tau ta mali. Ia, al whaingale o le tatou soifuanga ma le o langa o le tatou volai. I le ato toa lava ia. Ia o se whaivosis. Ia i ale mau mau. Ai o le nganga ato o le tangata. Ia ma le a fine nei. Ina ia. Maua se whi au ia. Ato no e o ngā fo nis. Ia, ia manuia lava o tau lau whafonga. Ia sa o talma atu nā. Whaftai nān mo le avanoa. Ia, whato whaia.
Paftay.